Alrighty, good morning. I'm Jonathan Albin, and this is Game Master's Soapbox on NycosRPG. Yes, I keep changing the title, I keep switching things around. If I did it the same way twice, I would just completely explode, I think. Alright, so we are here at the Ponderosa in Southern California. Beautiful here. It's always beautiful here. But today we've got topics, as we always do, and we're going to handle them one by one. And the reason why I am playing with the title as far as soapbox, toolbox, etc., is that some episodes seem to be like informational, and then others are really, I think, my personal controversies and I wouldn't say rants, right? I in the past I've done some decent rants where I get wound up pretty good, but today's topics I think are going to be a little bit less controversial as much as uh, a conversation. I don't anticipate having zero viewers forever. Right? That's just the reality of it for now, and gosh, the reality is that I've been a game master for 50 years. I've GM'd for literally thousands of people from coast to coast at different times and in various places, but I don't have a loyal following. And maybe it's just because I've been an individual storyteller and not trying to do this en masse, but the reality is I've been doing it for 50 years. Most people can't make a career out of what they love doing, but I've been able to do it for a good chunk of my life. And the ability to generate revenue doing what you like to do is so rare that it almost seems untouchable. And so I'm not going into any of that today, but we're going to talk about the topics that are on the screen here. I've had questions about whether or not player versus player is a viable option. I've had a ton of game masters who really appreciate it for various reasons, and we'll go into those in a bit. We're going to talk about the value of sandbox game mastery and whether it's even really possible, and if so, why. And we're also going to talk about game economies. There's a ton of different ones, so we'll go into a bunch of them. We're also going to talk about how to the care and feeding of a memberberry bush and how not to let it get out of hand. And then finally, to me, one of the biggest questions I have is why do we favor fantasy role playing as compared to science fiction or drama or any of the other forms? So we'll get into that as we go in. I wanted to also I'm checking out sound settings. I noticed a disparity or about an imbalance yesterday, and I'm trying to figure out what caused that. Do remember, if you haven't before, subscribe to the Twitch channel, because that way you don't get any commercial interruptions during the broadcast. On the YouTube side, subscription is at no cost, and the real benefit is to we as creators to let us know what the audience is looking for, what it is that we can do to draw your attention, and we appreciate it when you can like and subscribe onto our videos so that we know what's going on and what we should be making. The videos that I've done the best with seem to be the informational ones like this, so we'll see how that goes. But as usual, I'm going to go through each of the topics by the headers that I've got up above, and we'll try to work through all 5 of them within the 30 minutes or so that the show generally runs. We may end up going over and making it a full hour show, but we'll see how that goes. Of course, if you are a viewer and a member of our Patreon account, I am on the Discord at NycosRPG, and so greatly appreciate it if you want to join us. And I am on there on the audio channel even as we speak. Alrighty. With that, let's get started, shall we? All right, so we are talking about player versus player. And in today's modern world, there are video games that are built specifically for this purpose. Even amid the MMORPG crowd, the massive multiplayer online systems, there are areas wherein player versus player action is not only appreciated, it's endorsed and is a part of the play experience for those servers. And the question has come up at my table, not recently, but generally, can we make a player versus player action? Can we engage in sparring? Is there the possibility of building on our skills base by engaging with our allies rather than with an enemy? To which I say, if we're practicing just for practice's sake, then sure. You know, in narrative, it happens all the time. You know, the young student wishes to match blades with his tutor. And it can be an enjoyable experience for everybody if everybody holds the same tenor. But if one player tends to get his dander up or gets a little rowdy, pretty soon it could be a lethal concern. Furthermore, depending on how hard they press, they could be wearing themselves out unduly and therefore be at risk when somebody does come along that is of a danger or a threat. So in Tomato, for those of you that are insiders, you know what I'm saying. The concept of player engaging player at some level sounds interesting. As a game master, I don't particularly allow it, only because there are a lot of galvanizing issues within a role-playing game that can trigger someone, set them off, and make the play experience unfavorable for everybody at the table. And so by not allowing it, by restricting it in such a fashion that it cannot be lethal and the actual die rolling is not required, takes the wind out of the sails. The players don't feel the impetus to engage in it if they can't actually harm each other. And part of that's got to do with the fact that people play for different reasons. I mean, I've got players who are very much of the YOLO crowd. They don't understand the physics of the world, or not familiar enough with the differences in the cultures and such, so that they literally want to see whether or not they can push someone's buttons, if they can become harmed by words. I mean, obviously, in most cases, they say sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you. Well, in a role-playing environment, the world, especially in a theater of the mind environment, words is all you have to work with. So your existence and belonging and being is all wrapped up in the narrative, and therefore player versus player situations can get out of hand. And I have had situations where friendships have ended at the table because players got too wound up in the action of a player versus player skirmish that became a competition, that became a threat, and therefore actually ended the relationships. And so therefore I don't allow for it. Now, in the past I have, and there have been, each iteration I can tell you a story of how player A or player B lost his mind and went after each other. But the reality is that the players' personalities get involved in their characters, and when an affront occurs or somebody becomes damaged by the activities of a practice or a random act gone crazy, or even, especially back in the early days, it used to be that a player would need to quiet someone. Everyone agreed that somebody was talking too much, so they all agreed to knock him out. And then, of course, you got your paladin with your barbarian with his incredible strength and punches the guy out and actually does enough damage for it to be lethal. And then do you play rules as written or rule of cool, or is it rule of cool to put somebody down in a fictional fight? These are all issues that come up when you deal with player versus player, and so it became easier just simply to deny them the privilege of engaging in the combat scene, so to speak. From that topic, we go to. Okay, this one might light some fires. I hope so. If you're watching this and I don't get a response from you, I'll assume that you agree with me. No, I'm kidding. I realize that this is a live stream on a video. This is a video channel show occurring in a live stream with currently 0 viewers. So if you're seeing this on YouTube and it causes a response, please leave a comment. I'd love to have the conversation. In my opinion, obviously I don't need to say that because I'm saying it on the show, I don't believe the sandboxes exist. Just as there are people who perceive of major railroads when the game master gives a recommendation of where you might go to, I don't believe that there's a place where you can live where the game master's input doesn't color or change the narrative. The very existence of a game master, to me, seems to say there's something that we were talking about. There's a place that we are combining our minds, and in that place, something has to be happening. Even if the game master does not warrant it important or useful or relevant, there has to be something going on. The whole point of a game master is to create the external narrative, and even if that narrative is only describing what is happening for the players to interact with, you are building story. There is a direction for what's going on, even if it's out of the player's control. And even if it is in the player's control, there are still things that are going on because the NPCs do have an existence. That's why I have come to calling them NEPs, non-adjoined persons, because they have existed and will exist and continue to be despite or even with the blessing of the players. So when we speak of the particulars of the sandbox, really the question has to become, how does the sandbox manifest? And that comes down to how hands-on are you as a game master? Now, I would argue, and it's been argued by players in my games, that Nykos is not truly a sandbox because I've heard it described as a warehouse full of clocks. And each adventuring group is experiencing the urgency and importance of what's going on around them by their proximity and volume of the clock in the local area, and therefore they have to go from room to room, shutting off the alarms and putting all the other clocks in tune with one another. I've had other people say that it's a sandbox, but it's filled with quicksand, because wherever you go, the story draws you in, and so even if your intention was to live in a sandbox world, the very activities of the things around you are de facto the sand, and therefore the actions that you take determine how quickly or how smoothly you're able to walk across the surface. But as you get closer and closer to story points, they have a draw of their own and will drag the player group downward into the quicksand. I've had others say that it's a yes and box, and that is the idea that it's a sandbox, but it's filled with affirming and approving commentary so that the players choose the course and the game master supports that move or rejects that move based on what he's seeing for the story, and therefore is being improvisational. And I think this probably fits fairly well, the idea of a yes sandbox. But I have never, as a player, I've never played in a sandbox RPG. Every story I've ever played in had a purpose, a direction, a course that was set with the player's acquiescence, if not their overt intention. And therefore, the idea that a sandbox exists where you literally could sit at the bar and drink margaritas all day, it doesn't exist. And I would posit that it would be arguably one of the most boring places in the world if there was no framework. Having said that, of course, I do believe in player agency. I don't think anybody's built a system other than NycosRPG that really promotes that, since all advancement in the game is down the direction that the players want to go. But when we ask the question about whether or not a sandbox exists, it takes a system that is game master free. And if you have a game master free system, then you're not really playing a role play game, in my estimation. Yeah, I'll leave that alone for now. I'm sure we'll have other comments on that if you'd like to put those in the comment section on YouTube or PM me directly. Next up, game economies, and this is a huge sandbox, a huge toy box, huge soapbox, toolbox. Game economies are fundamentally the mechanisms upon which role-play games operate. The most obvious and probably the least understood would be the concept of the hit point pool, because that is an economy. If your hit points go to 0, in theory, you lose all action. The character has demised, is no longer at room temperature, or no, as assuming room temperature. The concept of game economies is you have to have some means of motion within a game, and the various economies are fundamentally the way we as human beings think about them. If you consider movement economies, how fast you can move, how many squares on a grid can you move per phase, how many actions do you get within the distance that you traveled. All these things are separate portions of economies. The hit point advancement in Dungeons & Dragons, however arbitrary it is, does function and has functioned for 50 years. The reason to abandon it has everything to do with the effective combat slog that it creates when characters are of moderate to high level. Simply the number of points that it takes to eliminate a persona, a character in a game, becomes so untenable as to become ludicrous. Because the alternative is that the amount of damage being dealt by the beings and the monsters is so also ludicrous, given the amount of advancement the players have gone through. Some of my favorite economies, though, are the ones that are not visible. Pardon me. Something got my eye. One of the biggest economies in the game, without even realizing it, is the time economy. You've got X number of hours in a day. Of course, most game worlds are the same as Terra because we don't like to have to do the math. But a 24-hour day gives an extensive portion of that, even all of it, can be used for activity and motion and whatnot. So therefore, it's the most malleable of the economies, and yet literally the most limiting. So if you're in an environment where you don't have, for instance, you are dealing with amount of light that you have to operate with. Man, this ice bugging me. The number of hours of light that you have becomes a factor. You have to consider what sources you're going to be using, how much light they produce, for what length of time, how often do you have to restart your source, is there a way to do an overlap so that you're never without it, or are you actually operating in the actual dark for some time? All of these things go into the economies, and what I find fascinating is I don't know a single game master who plays it hardline, who says we're going to track the number of minutes of light you have and determine whether or not you can survive the scenario by how much time you have to spend in the actual dark. I don't know anybody that does that. With 50 years of experience, you would think that at some point you'd run across somebody, and perhaps I have and just wasn't aware of it, but I don't know what this is with my eyes. That it's like gravel, you know. The economics of purchase power is another one that is I've seen run fast and loose. I find it fascinating, so fascinating, that in an economy based on supply and demand like capitalism, how many players immediately fall into a socialistic approach when it comes to dealing with purchases. And by this I mean game masters will hand wave purchase rates and just say, well, you can buy it at book rate, no matter where you are. And that seems completely irrational, being that some places are in the middle of a desert and others are along a coastline. And while arguably the coastline would have more access to items, the items that they have would be restricted simply by the access of others to that trade port. So a fishmonger is going to do considerably better than a trapper, just simply by the nature of where they are. And it's troubling to me that we have collectively decided to ignore the one thing that in our world would make our lives better, in that if we understood economies, then we would understand traveling from point A to point B, I should at least put some trinkets in my pocket from the local area because I know I'll be able to sell them in another area. In my own real life, this has happened. I've lived in Colorado, I've lived in Texas, I've lived in Kansas, I've lived all over the place. And wherever I was, there were specialties that you couldn't find someplace else. And so, being in the center of the heartland of Kansas, I know that there, stick furniture, actual wood furniture, is a prevalent item. There's lots and lots of it. And in cities like Colorado, Denver in Colorado, or St. Louis in Missouri, or farther points, that stick furniture, that wood furniture is at a premium because it's not available. There haven't been the craftsmen in that area, and there's not a lot of home-built stuff, and so therefore there was at least at one point a very extreme economy difference. So you literally could go out, caravan, no pun intended, caravan out to Kansas, pick up 6 or 8 or 10 unique pieces, drive them the 5 to 8, 10 hours getting to a Denver or Lincoln, Nebraska, or whatever, and find a market for all those pieces within hours, and therefore be able to fund your economy change. And in the world of Nykos, there is a lot of that going on, but it's going on behind the scenes because the player economy is at a completely different tier. You see, the average human being in the world of Nikos, or average commoner in any culture really, is driven to operate at an economy level that is a certain stratosphere, and then the other players pick different energy shells in terms of the amount of economy they have to work with, and the difference is so drastic as to itself be a driver. A group of adventurers in a city automatically raise prices because they can afford it. And having said that, a village or a community that can recognize when the big rollers are in town is going to do better in the long term, but it will have economy spikes because of that. And recognizing these economy spikes and recognizing you got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them, so to speak, means that the very direction of the story can be driven simply by the economies that are built into your system. I will do a later video where we go into hardlining this and deciding, redlining which pieces of economy are absolutely critical and shining the ones that aren't. But for now, we're going to leave that alone. Next topic. The memberberry bush. Now, if you don't know what I'm speaking of, I'll give you an example. A group of adventurers, group of players get together on a Tuesday night. They haven't seen each other in a week, and 2 of them were gone the previous week. So, as we sit down to start the session, one of them mentions something that didn't happen last week, but several weeks ago. And then the players start to kibitz about that particular action, how much fun it was, how enjoyable that encounter was, whatever happened to this guy who was there but hasn't been back since. And pretty soon you're so far into the weeds in terms of the backstory that it's hard to remember where you are at this current moment. This is a function of something that I don't even know who named it. I've heard the phrase a lot, and so I started using it. The idea of the memberberry. They are little kernels, little nuances of memory, kind of like memes, that trigger other thought processes and emotions, and in many cases, joy. So the memberberry is a physical representation, or no, a visual representation, not physical, a visual representation of the danger of capricious thought. And while memberberry bushes are particularly fun and they are easily used to moderate and monitor and pursue changes in the collective memory, and are truly mnemonic demons, when it comes down to it, they can be devastatingly damaging to a story if they keep getting in the way. But the memberberry bush, the care and feeding of one, is essential to your games group continuing to move forward. If you don't let them access the memberberries, they forget why they're here and they no longer have interest and the story goes flat. If you take care of and feed the memberberry bush judiciously, tossing even in your own tidbits, you can maintain a healthy environment with their memories. But it can be absolutely devastating if you let it gain root and gain control. And the easiest, the most dangerous way to do that is to let a single line of conversation lead them down that primrose path. And so you want to make sure that you're dealing with the memberberries that you keep it to a refined area, generally at the beginning of the session, or optimally at or after the end of the session. That's when the memberberries can go wild and crazy. But when you're actually trying to do it as part of your game session, you want to stay as focused on what you're trying to do as possible. Well, we did it. We got through no, we didn't. We got one more whole topic to go. So we will be extending. There you go. We're going to make it past the commercial break. So I know there's one here at the end of the page, so I'll take this time, possibly a double up, but do remember that this is NycosRPG. We are on Twitch and at NycosRPG on YouTube. Like our videos and follow us to get more information on when. And if you subscribe right now on Twitch, you get no more commercials. So that's a big plus. I get frustrated when I'm watching a video and all of a sudden it cuts out because they went to commercial, and this might be the case in this one. But by taking the moment here at the beginning and doing the subscription, I'm helping you bypass the actual commercial break itself. So make sure you subscribe. We are also on X and on Instagram. I just haven't started using those devices, those mechanics yet. As I get better at this, and perhaps I'm able to find somebody to help me be a social media manager, we'll get more of that done. We are also at Board Game Paradise on Mondays and Tuesdays, 6 p.m. until 10 p.m. So if you want to play at our table and you happen to be in the Southern California area, we'd love to have you. And if not, if you join our Patreon program, you get access to our Discord, and in that way you're able to join us in our online Patreon-only games on Saturdays and Sundays. Alrighty, we'll get back to it now because I want to get on to my final subject. Oh, that was my last subject. So I did do it right. That's funny. That's funny. Ladies and gentlemen, I continue to stymie myself with my stunning performance and my very deep professionalism that I exhibit here on NycosRPG on Twitch. So we have finished reaching our video, and we will talk to you guys all later. Have a great one.